My name is Mackenzie Thompson, and at 32 years old, I never expected my 5-year marriage to end over spilled wine. But when I accidentally tipped my glass onto my father-in-law's pristine shirt and he responded with his fist, the only thing more shocking was my husband Jason's reaction. "Apologize or leave," he demanded, as I stood there nursing my throbbing shoulder. In that moment I saw our entire relationship with crystal clarity, so I left, walking away from a man who chose his abusive father over his wife. Looking back, the red flags were there all along. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories about finding strength in impossible situations. Jason and I met 6 years ago at a birthday party for our mutual friend Tara. He was the charming guy in the corner making everyone laugh, with warm brown eyes that crinkled at the edges when he smiled. I was instantly drawn to him. His confidence, his quick wit, his ability to make me feel like the only person in the room. We exchanged numbers that night, and by the following morning, he had already texted asking when he could see me again. Our romance was a whirlwind. We moved in together after just 4 months, and he proposed on our 1-year anniversary during a weekend trip to Lake Tahoe. The proposal was perfect. Sunset over the lake. A beautiful speech about building our future together. I said yes without hesitation. We married 3 months later in a small ceremony with close friends and family. The wedding was my first real interaction with Jason's parents. His father Gerald was a successful real estate developer, tall, imposing, with a firm handshake and calculating eyes that seemed to be appraising my value. His mother Pamela was perfectly coiffed and polite, but with a coldness beneath her smile that made me uncomfortable. During our first dance, I remember Gerald cutting in, whispering to Jason that he'd done well enough while glancing at me. I brushed it off as wedding day nervousness. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to how Jason changed around his parents. His confident demeanor would shift. He'd become more formal, constantly seeking their approval. He called his father daily, asking for advice on everything from investment opportunities to which brand of lawnmower to buy. At the time, I thought it showed a close family bond, something I envied after losing my own parents in my early 20s. The first real warning sign came 3 months into our marriage. We'd been invited to Sunday dinner at his parents' house, an event I would soon learn was a mandatory weekly ritual. I'd prepared a homemade apple pie for dessert, wanting to impress Pamela. When I presented it, Gerald took one look and asked if I'd bothered to use real butter or just the cheap stuff. Before I could answer, Jason jumped in, apologizing for my basic baking skills and promising they'd bring a proper dessert from the upscale bakery next time. I sat stunned as he described how I wasn't raised with the finer things. The betrayal stung, but when I confronted him later, he insisted he was just trying to smooth things over with his father. These dinners became increasingly uncomfortable. Gerald would dominate conversations discussing politics, business deals, and country club gossip, while making pointed remarks about people who don't understand how the world really works. Pamela would nod in agreement, occasionally adding her own passive-aggressive comments about my clothes or career choice. I was a high school English teacher, a profession Gerald deemed suitable for women who don't need to support themselves properly. Jason never defended me. Instead, he'd join in, almost competing with his brother Ryan for their father's approval. Ryan and his wife Karen were the golden couple. He worked at Gerald's company, she volunteered for the right charities, and they lived in a house Gerald had helped them purchase in the same exclusive neighborhood. My best friend Allison noticed the change in me after about a year of marriage. "You're walking on eggshells," she observed over coffee one Saturday. "Every time you talk about visiting his family, you look physically ill." I brushed off her concerns, making excuses about adjusting to married life and blended families. But she wasn't wrong. I developed anxiety before each family gathering, sometimes getting physically sick in anticipation of Gerald's criticism and Jason's betrayal. The monthly dinner that changed everything was to celebrate Gerald and Pamela's 35th wedding anniversary. Jason was particularly anxious about this one. "Dad's invited some important business associates," he explained while I was getting ready. "Please wear something appropriate." He gestured to the conservative navy dress he'd actually purchased for me the previous week. I bit back my irritation and complied, even adding the pearl necklace Pamela had given me for Christmas. A gift she'd mentioned was more suitable than that bohemian jewelry you seem to prefer. As I applied my makeup carefully, I caught Jason watching me in the mirror. "You look nice," he said, but then added, "Maybe go easier on the eye makeup? You know how Mom feels about that." I put down my eyeliner, suddenly feeling like a teenager being prepped for a school photo rather than a grown woman. Still, I wanted the evening to go well. Despite everything, I loved Jason and kept hoping his parents would eventually accept me. "It's just one dinner," I told myself as we drove to their house. "I can get through one dinner." If only I'd known what that dinner would actually cost me. Gerald and Pamela's house stood imposingly at the end of a curved driveway in Woodhaven Estates, the most exclusive neighborhood in our city. The colonial-style mansion boasted 6 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, and what Gerald always referred to as appropriate ceiling height for people of quality, whatever that meant. As Jason pulled our modest Audi, the car Gerald had suggested he buy, alongside the gleaming luxury vehicles already parked outside, I felt the familiar knot form in my stomach. "Remember," Jason whispered as we approached the grand entrance with its twin pillars and heavy oak door. "Dad just closed that deal with the Turner Group. He's in a great mood, so let's keep it that way." The implied message was clear. Don't say or do anything that might upset Gerald. The door swung open before we could ring the bell. Gerald stood there in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, not a silver hair out of place. His eyes, the same warm brown as Jason's but lacking any warmth, quickly assessed me from head to toe. "You're late," he said flatly, though we were exactly on time. "Everyone's already here." "Sorry, Dad," Jason immediately responded, though we'd left our house with plenty of time to spare. Traffic on Westlake was backed up. Gerald's attention had already shifted. "That dress is suitable, Mackenzie," he said, which was the closest thing to a compliment I'd ever received from him. He turned without waiting for a response and led us through the marble-floored foyer into the formal living room. Pamela glided over, martini in hand, her blonde hair styled in an immaculate bob. "Darling, you made it," she air-kissed near my cheek, careful not to make actual contact. "I was just telling the Blanchards about Jason's promotion. Such a pity you couldn't make the country club celebration last week." I hadn't been invited to any celebration. From Jason's startled expression, I gathered he hadn't either. "Mom's confused," he muttered under his breath. "Dad took some clients out, that's all." Before I could respond, Ryan approached with his wife Karen. Ryan was essentially a younger version of Gerald, same imposing height, same calculating gaze, but with Jason's more athletic build. Karen, a former beauty pageant contestant with perfect posture and a perpetual beauty queen smile, wore a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Jason Mackenzie." Ryan nodded at us both, but his eyes lingered on me with slight disapproval. I later realized my pearl necklace didn't match my earrings. A fashion faux pas in this crowd. "Mackenzie, your dress is nice," Karen said with the practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "Navy is such a teacher color, isn't it?" I forced a smile. "Thank you, Karen. You look lovely as always." The other guests included Gerald's business partner Frank and his wife Donna, the Blanchards who owned several car dealerships in the region, and a judge and his wife whose names I didn't catch because Gerald interrupted their introduction to me to point out Jason to the judge. As we moved around the room for pre-dinner drinks, I noticed how naturally Jason fit into this world of subtle power plays and status signals. He knew exactly which topics to discuss with each person: golf handicaps with Frank, judicial appointments with the judge, European vacation spots with Donna. Meanwhile, I found myself relegated to standing beside Karen and Pamela as they discussed the latest charity gala committee drama. "We had to remove Melinda Sutton from the planning committee," Pamela was saying, swirling her martini. "Her husband's legal troubles are just too embarrassing to ignore." "Absolutely," Karen agreed. "Standards must be maintained." They both glanced at me, clearly expecting some contribution to this conversation about people I'd never met. "That sounds challenging," I offered weakly. Pamela's thin smile indicated my response was inadequate. "Well, Mackenzie wouldn't understand the complexities of maintaining social standards. Public school environments are so different." Before I could defend my profession, Gerald announced dinner was ready. We proceeded to the formal dining room with its gleaming mahogany table set with what I recognized as Pamela's special occasion china and crystal. Name cards indicated our seating arrangement, Gerald at the head, Pamela at the foot, with Jason and me separated on opposite sides of the table. As everyone settled in, Gerald made a show of selecting wines from his temperature-controlled cabinet. "I've been saving this 2005 Bordeaux for a special occasion," he announced, showing the label to Frank and the judge, who both made appreciative noises. "And for those who can truly appreciate it," he added, his gaze deliberately skipping over me. As the wine was poured, I noticed my glass received significantly less than others. Gerald raised his glass. "To 35 years with the most strategic partnership of my life," he toasted Pamela, who nodded regally in acknowledgement. Everyone laughed at what was apparently a long-standing joke between them. The first course arrived, some kind of seafood mousse that I picked at while conversations flowed around me. I noticed Jason watching his father, laughing a bit too loudly at Gerald's jokes, nodding too enthusiastically at his pronouncements. It was like watching an eager puppy performing for treats, and something about it made my heart ache. "So Mackenzie," Gerald's voice suddenly addressed me directly, causing conversations around the table to pause. "Jason tells me you're still insisting on working full-time. Don't you think it's time to consider your real responsibilities to this family?" And just like that, I was center stage in what I knew would be another uncomfortable performance. "I enjoy teaching, Gerald," I replied carefully, conscious of all eyes on me. "My students need consistency through the school year." Gerald carved his beef tenderloin with surgical precision. "Students come and go. Family legacy is what matters." Karen understood that immediately, didn't you, Karen? Karen nodded, touching her perfectly styled hair. "Of course. I left marketing as soon as Ryan and I got serious. A proper home requires full attention." "Mackenzie is an excellent teacher," Jason interjected, and for a moment my heart lifted thinking he might actually defend me. "But we've been discussing her cutting back to part-time next year." We had discussed no such thing. I stared at him, betrayal burning in my chest, but he avoided my eyes. "About time," Gerald declared. "Thompson men need proper homes and families. My father always said a household reflects the woman's competence." Pamela understood that from day one. Pamela smiled tightly from the other end of the table. "It's simply about priorities, dear." The judge's wife, Judith, leaned forward. "What grade do you teach?" "Mackenzie. High school English literature," I answered, grateful for the neutral question. "How quaint," Pamela interrupted before Judith could respond. "Though I've never understood why someone would choose to spend their days with other people's teenagers when they could be preparing for their own family. Some people aren't naturally maternal," Karen added with false sympathy. "Not everyone has the nurturing instinct." Frank cleared his throat. "My daughter teaches university physics. Very fulfilling career." Gerald's expression darkened. "University is different from babysitting high schoolers who can't read properly, Frank. Besides, your daughter remains unmarried at what, 36 now?" The uncomfortable silence that followed made me shrink in my seat. Frank looked down at his plate. "I think education is a noble profession," Judith offered kindly. "Noble doesn't build family empires," Gerald dismissed. "Jason needs someone focused on advancing his position, not grading poorly written essays about Shakespeare." I felt my cheeks burning. "Teaching literature helps develop critical thinking and empathy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Skills that benefit any family." Gerald laughed, a sharp bark without humor. "Listen to that academic jargon. This is exactly what I warned you about, Jason. These progressive education types with their feelings and theories instead of practical values." Jason shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "Did you see the market dropped again today?" Ryan smoothly changed the subject, directing the question to his father. Gerald launched into a detailed analysis of his investment strategy, and just like that, I was dismissed from the conversation. I caught Judith giving me a sympathetic glance, but everyone else seemed relieved the uncomfortable moment had passed. As dinner progressed, I grew increasingly quiet. Jason had morphed into someone I barely recognized, laughing at Gerald's inappropriate jokes about welfare queens and entitled immigrants. agreeing with outrageous political statements I knew he didn't actually believe. When Gerald referred to one of my favorite authors as that feminist trash peddler, Jason nodded as though he hadn't just last month praised the same author's new novel. I pushed food around my plate, appetite gone, sipping water instead of the wine I desperately wanted but knew would only loosen my tongue and create problems. The one time I attempted to join a conversation about the new community arts center, Gerald cut me off mid-sentence. Leave civic planning discussions to people who actually contribute to the tax base substantially, Mackenzie, he said dismissively. Teachers' salaries hardly qualify you to have informed opinions on municipal investments. Jason laughed along with everyone else. The Jason I thought I'd married would have highlighted my volunteer work with the Arts Center Planning Committee. This Jason watched me withdraw further into silence with apparent relief. By the time dessert arrived, an elaborate chocolate creation from an upscale patisserie, the conversation had turned to appropriate education for future Thompson grandchildren. Private school is the only option, Gerald declared. The Henderson Academy has already assured me they'll have places when the time comes. We haven't even discussed children yet, I said quietly, unable to stay silent on this point. Gerald's eyes narrowed. You're 32, Mackenzie. The biological clock isn't just ticking. It's about to expire. What exactly are you waiting for? Perhaps Mackenzie has fertility concerns she's not sharing, Pamela suggested with false concern. Many career women wait too long. Mom, Jason warned, finally showing a hint of discomfort with the direction of conversation. What? Pamela raised her eyebrows innocently. I'm simply concerned. Karen is already tracking her ovulation, and she's only 29. Karen nodded proudly. We want 4 children. The Thompson name needs proper representation in the next generation. I felt cornered, my most personal choices suddenly up for public dissection. Jason and I will decide about children on our own timeline, I managed. That's the problem with your generation. Gerald jabbed his fork in my direction. Everything's about your timeline and your choices instead of responsibility to family. When I was Jason's age, Ryan was already 5 years old. Different times, Dad, Jason said weakly. Weaker times, Gerald corrected. Men allowing their wives to prioritize meaningless careers over family duty. If Pamela had insisted on finding herself, or whatever nonsense instead of supporting my business in the early years, we wouldn't be sitting in this house today. Pamela nodded in agreement. A woman's greatest achievement is creating the environment for her husband's success and raising children who understand their legacy. I felt physically ill. These people were discussing me as though I were a defective brood mare, rather than a human being with my own dreams and identity. Worse, Jason sat there allowing it, occasionally even agreeing with their medieval perspectives. Perhaps we should clear the dessert plates, Pamela suggested as the conversation lulled. Coffee in the living room? Mackenzie can help me, she added with a pointed look in my direction. The woman had household staff, but apparently collecting dessert plates was now my designated role. As I stood to help, I caught Jason mouthing thank you to me for complying with this obvious power play. My hands trembled slightly as I gathered plates, a mixture of hurt and growing anger making it difficult to maintain my composure. Little did I know that this uncomfortable dinner was about to become the turning point of my entire life. I followed Pamela into the kitchen, my arms carefully balancing 5 dessert plates while she carried only her own and Gerald's. The kitchen was immaculate and massive, with gleaming stainless steel appliances and marble countertops. A uniformed server was quietly loading the dishwasher with dinner plates. Just set those down anywhere, Pamela instructed with a wave of her manicured hand. Maria will handle them. Maria gave me a sympathetic smile as I placed the stack of plates on the counter. While we have a moment alone, Pamela said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, I wanted to mention something about Gerald's birthday next month. We're planning a surprise party, and I thought you might want to contribute by handling some of the simpler arrangements, perhaps the paper goods. Paper goods. At what would undoubtedly be a catered affair with real china and crystal. The insult was so thinly veiled it was transparent. I'd be happy to help in any meaningful way, I replied evenly. Pamela's smile tightened. Well, we all contribute according to our abilities, don't we? Now be a dear and bring out the wine for the men. The Cabernet, not the Merlot. Gerald feels the Merlot is wasted on Frank, who can't tell the difference anyway. She handed me an unopened bottle of red wine and a corkscrew. As I took them, she added, "Try not to mention I said that about Frank. Some things are better kept between us women." With that, she glided out of the kitchen, leaving me to wonder how many other insulting things she said about me when I wasn't present. I fumbled with the corkscrew, my hand still shaking slightly from the tension of dinner. "Would you like help with that, Senora?" Maria asked quietly. "No, thank you." I managed to get the cork out cleanly. "I've got it." I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and returned to the dining room where Gerald, Jason, Ryan, Frank, and the judge remained seated, deep in conversation about some local political scandal. The women had already moved to the living room. "Ah, the wine." Gerald acknowledged my presence without actually looking at me. "Set it down here." I approached the table, forcing a polite smile. Gerald was gesturing emphatically about something, his movements becoming more expansive as he warmed to his topic. "These entitled millennials thinking they deserve starting salaries that took us decades to earn," he was saying as I carefully placed the wine bottle near him. "It's the participation trophy mentality that your generation started, Frank." Frank looked uncomfortable but didn't disagree. Jason and Ryan both nodded along with their father's assessment, though I knew Jason had privately expressed completely opposite views about fair compensation just last week. Gerald continued his rant, turning suddenly in his chair just as I was pouring wine into his glass. His elbow collided with my arm, sending a cascade of deep red Cabernet directly onto his pristine white shirt and expensive tie. Time seemed to slow down. I watched in horror as the dark liquid spread across the crisp fabric, creating a growing stain that looked disturbingly like blood. For a split second, the table fell into complete silence. Then Gerald exploded. "You clumsy, stupid woman," he roared, leaping to his feet with such force that his chair toppled backward. "Look what you've done." "I'm so sorry," I gasped, grabbing a napkin. "It was an accident. You turned and—" I never finished my sentence. Gerald's open palm connected with my shoulder with such force that I staggered backward, losing my balance and falling hard against the edge of the sideboard before crumpling to the floor. The wine bottle shattered beside me, sending glass and remaining wine across the cream-colored carpet. The pain was immediate and shocking, a burning sensation radiating from my shoulder down my arm. But more shocking was the reality that my father-in-law had just hit me with full force in front of a table of witnesses. I looked up in disbelief, meeting Gerald's eyes. There was no remorse there, only rage and something else, satisfaction perhaps at finally putting me in my place. "Gerald!" Frank stood up, his voice sharp with alarm. "What the hell was that?" "Dad." Ryan's voice held a note of caution, though he made no move to help me. The judge sat frozen, his expression unreadable. Through tears of pain and shock, I looked to Jason, my husband, my partner, the man who had vowed to stand by me. He was staring at his father, his face pale, but he remained seated. "She did it on purpose," Gerald spat, brushing ineffectually at his shirt. "This tie was from Milan. The shirt is ruined." "It was clearly an accident," Frank said firmly. "You bumped her arm, Gerald." "I saw it." Gerald's face reddened further. "Taking her side, Frank? She's been looking for ways to embarrass me all evening. Don't think I haven't noticed her attitude." From the doorway came a gasp. Pamela stood there with Karen and the other women behind her, surveying the scene. "My carpet," she moaned, ignoring me still on the floor. "That's a 100-year-old Persian rug." I pushed myself up, wincing at the sharp pain in my shoulder. No one moved to help me. With as much dignity as I could muster, I steadied myself against the sideboard, my eyes finding Jason's. "Jason," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Please." Finally, he stood, but instead of coming to my side, he went to his father. "Dad, let's get you cleaned up. I'm sure we can save the shirt if we treat it quickly." I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. My husband was tending to his father's stained shirt while I stood injured from a physical assault. "Jason," I said more forcefully. "He hit me." Jason glanced at me, his expression conflicted. "You did spill the wine, Mackenzie." Those words hit me harder than Gerald's hand had. 5 simple words that revealed everything about our marriage. Everything about where I stood in the hierarchy of Jason's loyalties. It was an accident, I said, my voice gaining strength despite the tears streaming down my face. And nothing justifies him hitting me. Oh please, Gerald scoffed. I barely touched you. Stop being so dramatic. You're embarrassing yourself and my son. Mackenzie, Jason said quietly, his eyes pleading. Just apologize to Dad so we can move past this unfortunate incident. I stared at him in disbelief. Apologize? He physically assaulted me and you want me to apologize? The room had gone completely silent. Even Pamela had stopped fussing about the carpet to watch this showdown. Gerald straightened to his full height, looking down at me with contempt. I expect an apology for your clumsiness and attitude, and then this matter is closed. I looked around the room, at Frank's uncomfortable expression, at the judge who was studiously examining his water glass, at Ryan and Karen's matching looks of disdain, at Pamela's thin-lipped disapproval. Finally, my eyes settled on Jason, silently begging him to stand up for me, to be the man I thought I had married. Mackenzie, Jason said, his voice tight. Just apologize to Dad. Please. You did ruin his shirt and Mum's carpet. In that moment, something broke inside me, and something else hardened into resolve. No, I said simply. The single word hung in the air between us. Jason's eyes widened in disbelief, as though the possibility of defiance had never occurred to him. What did you say? Gerald's voice was dangerously quiet. I said no. My voice grew stronger. I will not apologize for an accident that happened when you bumped my arm. And I certainly won't apologize to someone who responded to spilled wine by hitting me. Pamela made a small, distressed sound. Really, Mackenzie, you're making this much worse than it needs to be. Am I? I turned to face her. Your husband physically assaulted me, and you're worried about a carpet. Don't be melodramatic, Gerald sneered. If that little tap hurt you, you're even weaker than I thought. I pulled down the shoulder of my dress to reveal the already forming bruise, a dark red mark that would soon turn purple. Does this look like the result of a little tap to you? I asked the room at large. Frank looked away uncomfortably. The judge suddenly became very interested in his phone. Karen whispered something to Ryan, who nodded slightly. Jason stepped forward, positioning himself between me and his father in what I momentarily thought was a protective gesture. I was wrong. Mackenzie, you're embarrassing everyone, he hissed. Dad didn't mean to hit you that hard. You know he has a temper, and you provoked him. The betrayal of those words stole my breath. Provoked him? By accidentally spilling wine? You've been difficult all evening, Jason continued, his voice low but harsh. Making those comments about your job, challenging Dad's opinions on education. Standing up for myself is not being difficult, I interrupted, disbelief giving way to anger. And nothing justifies violence, Jason. Nothing. Gerald stepped forward, looming over both of us. I've had enough of this dramatics. Jason, control your wife or take her home. You don't control me, I said to Gerald before turning back to Jason. And neither do you. Jason ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times during our marriage. But never had it been directed at me like this, with such coldness in his eyes. Mackenzie, you have 2 choices right now, he said firmly. Apologize to my father for the wine and your behavior. Or leave. My behavior? I repeated incredulously. I've been polite and accommodating while being insulted and belittled all evening. Then I was physically assaulted and you want me to apologize? Stop saying assaulted, Jason snapped. You're being hysterical. Something clicked into place in my mind. A realization so clear and sudden it was almost audible. This was who Jason truly was. Not the man who held me when I cried during sad movies, not the man who brought me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, not the man who had once promised to be my partner in everything. In this crucial moment, when faced with a choice between right and wrong, between his wife and his abusive father, he had revealed his true character. I see, I said quietly, a strange calm settling over me. I finally see you, Jason. All of you. I turned to survey the room, these people who had made me feel small and inadequate for years. I see all of you very clearly now. I thought of all the red flags I'd ignored over the years, the times Jason had dismissed my feelings, the subtle ways he undermined my confidence, how he always prioritized his parents' expectations over our relationship. I remembered how he'd laughed when Gerald made demeaning comments about my teaching career, how he'd pressured me to change my appearance to please his mother, how he'd gradually isolated me from my friends who weren't sophisticated enough. The pattern was so obvious now, laid bare by this moment of crisis. Jason wasn't just enabling his father's abuse. He was cut from the same cloth, just with a more charming veneer. "I'm not apologizing," I said with quiet dignity. "And I am leaving. But not just this dinner. I'm leaving this marriage." Jason's confident expression faltered. "Don't be ridiculous. You're overreacting." "Am I?" I met his gaze steadily. "You just watched your father hit your wife, and your response was to demand that I apologize to him. If you think that's an appropriate reaction, then we have nothing left to discuss. Mackenzie, you're being. If you say dramatic or hysterical one more time, I swear to God, Jason." I let the sentence hang unfinished. This isn't about spilled wine. This is about respect and safety and partnership, things I thought our marriage had but clearly doesn't. Gerald made a dismissive noise. "Always the victim. This is what happens when you marry beneath your station, Jason. I warned you." For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw something like regret cross Jason's face. But then his expression hardened, and he moved to stand beside his father, a position that symbolized everything wrong with our relationship. "You need to calm down and think rationally," Jason said coldly. "If you leave now, like this, don't expect me to come chasing after you." I almost laughed at the absurdity of his threat. "I don't want you to chase me, Jason. I want you to be a decent human being who doesn't condone violence." But apparently that's too much to ask. I turned away from him, from all of them, grabbing my purse from where it hung on the back of my dining chair. The pain in my shoulder throbbed with each movement, a physical reminder of what had transpired. "Judge Harmon," I said, addressing the silent man directly, "you witnessed an assault tonight. I don't know if that means anything to you in your professional capacity, but I wanted to acknowledge that you saw what happened." The judge cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Family matters are complicated, Mrs. Thompson. Of course, even a judge would choose to look the other way, rather than confront Gerald Thompson's behavior." "Mackenzie, don't you dare walk out that door," Jason called as I headed toward the foyer. "If you leave now, we're done." I paused at the threshold, not bothering to turn around. "We've been done for longer than I realized, Jason. I just didn't want to see it until now." And with those words, I walked out of Gerald and Pamela Thompson's house, out of their toxic family dynamic, and out of my marriage to a man who had never truly been mine. The night air hit my face as I stepped outside, cool and refreshing after the suffocating atmosphere I just left. For a moment, I stood on the perfectly manicured lawn, my mind racing with practical concerns. I'd come in Jason's car, my phone was at 15% battery, and I had no immediate plan beyond escape. I started walking down the long driveway, my heels sinking slightly into the gravel. The physical pain in my shoulder was nothing compared to the emotional turmoil churning inside me. 5 years of marriage, ending over spilled wine, except it wasn't about the wine at all. It was about respect, safety, and the devastating realization that the man I'd married would never truly be my partner. Once I reached the main road, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and called the one person I knew would come without question. "Allison." My voice broke. "I need help." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Allison's car, tears streaming down my face as I recounted what had happened. She listened in horrified silence, occasionally shaking her head or reaching over to squeeze my hand. "He hit you," she repeated, her expression thunderous. "Gerald hit you, and Jason told you to apologize?" "Yes," I whispered, the reality of it still sinking in. "That's it. You're coming home with me tonight," she said decisively. "No arguments." I didn't have the energy to argue anyway. As we drove through the darkened streets toward her apartment, my phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Jason. 8:47 p.m. "Where are you? This is childish." 8:52 p.m. "You're embarrassing both of us." 1 p.m. Dad says he's sorry if he hurt you. Come back and we can all move past this. 9:15 p.m. Seriously, Mackenzie, you're overreacting. 9:32 p.m. Fine. Stay at Allison's. We'll talk tomorrow when you're being rational. Notice that Jason himself never apologized. His father was sorry if he hurt me. Not sorry that he hit me. The conditional nature of the apology and the continued minimization of what had happened only confirmed I'd made the right decision. About halfway to Allison's apartment, the emotional and physical shock caught up with me. Pull over, I gasped suddenly. I think I'm going to be sick. Allison quickly guided the car to the side of the road. I barely made it out before emptying the contents of my stomach onto the grass. She held my hair back, murmuring soothing words as I retched and sobbed. It's okay, she said, rubbing my back gently. Let it all out. When we finally arrived at her place, she settled me on her couch with a blanket and an ice pack for my shoulder, which had now developed an ugly purple bruise. Her cat, Milo, curled up beside me, his warm presence oddly comforting. I should have listened to you, I said hoarsely. All those times you said something wasn't right about Jason and his family. Don't do that, Allison said firmly. This isn't your fault. Abusers are experts at making you think everything is normal until suddenly it's not. Abusers, I repeated, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. I never thought I'd be in an abusive relationship. No one ever does, she replied softly. Do you want to file a police report about Gerald? I considered it briefly, then shook my head. What's the point? You saw how even a judge was willing to look the other way. The Thompsons have too much influence in this town. We stayed up late into the night, talking through my options. Allison offered her guest room for as long as I needed it. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I fell into a restless sleep filled with dreams of falling and no one catching me. Morning brought no clarity, only a stiffness in my shoulder, and the harsh reality of what lay ahead. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Jason, and a string of texts that evolved from anger to bargaining. 6:24 a.m. This is ridiculous. Come home. 7:15 a.m. I talked to Dad. He feels terrible. He was just startled by the wine. 7:48 a.m. Babe, please. We can work this out. 8:36 a.m. Is this really worth throwing away 5 years of marriage? 9:02 a.m. I miss you. Let's talk this through. Not once did he acknowledge that his father's violence was unacceptable. Not once did he apologize for failing to protect me. Not once did he recognize the fundamental betrayal of demanding I apologize to my abuser. I silenced my phone and joined Allison for coffee in her kitchen. What do you want to do today? She asked gently. I need clothes, my laptop, some personal documents, I replied, trying to think practically. But I'm not ready to face Jason yet. You don't have to, she assured me. We can go when he's at work. But Jason had other plans. Around noon, his BMW pulled up outside Allison's apartment building. I watched from the window as he got out, carrying a bouquet of flowers, roses, not my favorite lilies. Even in this gesture, he couldn't truly see me. He's here, I said to Allison, my heart racing. You don't have to see him if you don't want to, she reminded me. I can tell him to leave. No, I took a deep breath. I need to do this. When Jason's knock came, Allison answered the door but stood firmly in the doorway, blocking his entrance. I need to speak to my wife, he said, his voice carrying the smooth authority that had once seemed so attractive but now sounded manipulative. That's up to Mackenzie, Allison replied coolly. I approached the door, staying slightly behind Allison. What do you want, Jason? His eyes widened at the sight of my face, pale, with dark circles under my eyes, and the visible edge of the bruise peeking out from my t-shirt collar. Jesus, Mac, he said, using the nickname I'd always loved. You look terrible. Thanks, I replied dryly. That's what happens when your father-in-law hits you and your husband demands you apologize for it. He sighed dramatically. Can we not do this in the hallway? Can I come in so we can talk privately? I glanced at Allison, who nodded slightly. It's your call. You can come in, I decided. But Allison stays. Jason clearly didn't like this condition. But he entered the apartment, setting the flowers on the coffee table like a peace offering. These are for you. Roses, I noted. Not lilies. He frowned in confusion. What? Nothing. I sighed. What do you want, Jason? I want you to come home, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. This whole situation has gotten out of hand. Dad feels awful about what happened. Does he? I crossed my arms. Did he actually say he was sorry for hitting me? Jason shifted uncomfortably. He said he reacted instinctively and didn't mean to push you that hard. The wine startled him, and you know how he is about his clothes. That's not an apology, I pointed out. And neither is what you just said. Look, Mackenzie. Jason's voice took on the patient tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. You know how Dad is. That's the closest thing to an apology you're going to get from him. Can't we just move past this? Move past this? I echoed incredulously. Your father physically assaulted me, and you're asking me to just forget about it. He didn't assault you, Jason insisted, his facade of patience cracking. He reacted badly, yes, but you're making it sound like he beat you up or something. I pulled down the collar of my shirt, revealing the full extent of the now purple bruise. This is from one hit, Jason. 1. What happens when he decides I've disrespected him again? What if next time it's a closed fist instead of an open hand? Jason looked away from the bruise, unable to face the evidence. That won't happen. You can't guarantee that, I said quietly. And more importantly, you've shown me where your loyalties lie. You chose him over me last night. You would choose him again. That's not fair, he protested. I was trying to defuse the situation. By demanding that I apologize to a man who had just hit me? He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. You're twisting everything. Dad made a mistake, he feels bad about it. And now we need to move forward as a family. As a family, I repeated. That's the problem, Jason. When you say family, you mean your parents first, then you, with me as some kind of afterthought whose feelings and safety don't matter. That's ridiculous, he scoffed. Is it? When was the last time you stood up to your father when he belittled me? When was the last time you chose my needs over his demands? His silence was answer enough. I want a divorce, I said. The word surprisingly easy to speak now that I'd made the decision. Jason's expression hardened. You're being hasty. One bad dinner and you're throwing away our marriage. One bad dinner? I laughed without humor. It's been hundreds of bad dinners, Jason. Countless moments where you've let your parents diminish me. Last night was just the first time it became physical. If you do this, he said, his voice low and threatening, Dad will make things difficult for you. He's got connections everywhere in this town. Is that a threat? It's reality. He replied coldly. Dad's talking about filing charges for the damaged shirt and carpet. Do you know how much that Persian rug was worth? Allison, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. Are you seriously threatening her with property damage charges after your father assaulted her? I was a witness, Jason. So was Judge Harmon, Frank, and everyone else at that dinner. Jason's expression faltered slightly. Nobody wants this to get ugly, Allison. I'm just telling Mackenzie what could happen if she insists on blowing this out of proportion. I think you should leave now, I said quietly. I'll have my lawyer contact you about arrangements for me to collect my things. Lawyer? Jason laughed dismissively. You don't have a lawyer. Miranda Davis, Allison interjected. My cousin. She specializes in divorce and domestic violence cases. Jason's face reddened. Domestic violence? This is insane. I never laid a hand on you. Mackenzie. No, I agreed. You just stood by while your father did, then blamed me for it. In some ways that's worse. He stared at me for a long moment, something like realization finally dawning in his eyes. You're really doing this? Yes, I confirmed. I am. Fine, he spat, all pretense of reconciliation gone. Do whatever you want. But don't come crying back when you realize what you've thrown away. With that he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Allison put her arm around my shoulders, carefully avoiding the bruised one. You okay? I exhaled slowly. No, I admitted. But I will be. Later that week, with Allison accompanying me for support, I returned to the house I'd shared with Jason to collect essential belongings. He wasn't home deliberately, I suspected, which made the process easier but somehow more painful. Walking through the rooms we decorated together, seeing the life we'd built, I felt a profound sense of loss. Not for Jason, I realized, but for the person I'd thought he was. For the marriage I'd believed we had. I took only what was unquestionably mine: clothes, personal mementos, the jewelry I'd inherited from my grandmother. As I was packing my books, I discovered a gift from Jason I'd forgotten about. A first edition of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice he'd given me for our 3rd anniversary. Inside was his inscription: "To my Elizabeth Bennet, who challenges me to be a better man." Except he hadn't wanted to be challenged. He'd wanted compliance, acquiescence to his family's toxic dynamics. I left the book on his pillow. With Allison's help, I found a small 1-bedroom apartment I could afford on my teacher's salary. It was nothing like the spacious house I'd shared with Jason, but it was mine. A space where no one would belittle me or expect me to shrink myself to fit their expectations. When I returned to work after spring break, my colleagues noticed the change in me. My department chair, Sarah, pulled me aside after a faculty meeting. "Everything okay, Mackenzie? You seem different." I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm going through a divorce." Her expression softened. "I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do?" "Actually, yes," I said, surprising myself with my directness. "I could use extra hours if there are any summer school positions available. I need to build up my savings." Sarah nodded. "As a matter of fact, we're short a teacher for the junior literature seminar. It's yours if you want it." That conversation was the first step in reclaiming my professional identity. The career Gerald had dismissed as meaningless and Jason had expected me to eventually abandon. Over the following weeks, I discovered unexpected allies. Jason's sister Abigail, who had distanced herself from the family years ago, a decision I now understood completely, reached out after hearing what had happened. "I wish I could say I'm surprised," she said when we met for coffee. "But Gerald's always been a tyrant, and Jason learned early that appeasing him was easier than standing up to him." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I asked. Abigail smiled sadly. "Would you have believed me? When you're in love, warnings about your partner's family just sound like bitter jealousy." She was right, of course. I wouldn't have listened. 3 months after I left, the divorce proceedings were underway. Gerald had made good on his threat to make things difficult, with Jason's lawyers claiming I had abandoned the marriage without cause. My lawyer, Miranda, was confident but honest about the challenges. "The Thompsons have money and influence," she acknowledged during one of our meetings. "But we have documentation of your injury and witnesses to the assault. They don't want this getting out publicly." She was right. When Gerald realized I wasn't backing down, the tone of negotiations changed. Suddenly, Jason was offering a more equitable settlement. Not generous but fair enough that prolonging the fight seemed pointless. "They want this to go away quietly," Miranda explained. "Gerald's reputation in the community is too important to risk a public airing of domestic violence." The irony wasn't lost on me. The same social standing Gerald had lorded over me was now motivating him to resolve things quickly and quietly. As spring turned to summer, I gradually rebuilt my life. The panic attacks that had plagued me before family gatherings subsided. I reconnected with friends Jason had subtly distanced me from. I started therapy, learning to recognize the patterns that had led me to accept such treatment for so long. "You didn't fail," my therapist, Dr. Chun, assured me during one particularly difficult session. "You survived, you recognized abuse, and you removed yourself from it. That's not failure, that's courage." Slowly I came to believe her. The woman who had walked out of Gerald and Pamela's house that night was stronger than the one who had entered it, bruised but unbroken. Summer faded into fall, and with the changing seasons came a gradual but profound transformation in my life. My small apartment had evolved from a temporary refuge to a true home. I'd painted the walls a soft sage green, a color Jason had always vetoed as too bohemian, and filled the space with plants, books, and art that expressed my personality, rather than conforming to someone else's expectations. The divorce was finalized in October, almost 6 months to the day after I'd walked out of the Thompson family dinner. The terms were fair, largely thanks to Miranda's skillful negotiation and the Thompson family's desire to avoid public scrutiny. I received a reasonable financial settlement and, more importantly, a clean break. My final meeting with Jason took place in Miranda's office, neutral territory that still felt charged with emotion. He looked both familiar and like a stranger, dressed in an expensive suit that reminded me of his father. "You look well," he offered awkwardly as we waited for our lawyers to prepare the final documents. "I am well," I replied, surprised to find it was true. "I still think this could have been resolved differently," he said, a hint of the old manipulation in his tone. "If you just—" "No," I interrupted firmly. "There was no other resolution once I understood what our marriage really was." He frowned. "You make it sound like the whole thing was a sham." "Not a sham," I said carefully, "but not equal. Not healthy. I see that now." "Dad asks about you sometimes," Jason said, changing tactics. "He feels bad about how things ended." I raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Does he? Has he ever actually said he's sorry for hitting me?" Jason's silence answered my question. "That's what I thought," I said quietly. When the papers were ready, we signed them without further conversation. As I watched Jason add his signature to the document that officially ended our marriage, I felt a complex mixture of grief and relief. 5 years of my life closed with a pen stroke. "Goodbye, Jason," I said simply, extending my hand in a businesslike gesture. He looked at my hand for a moment before taking it. "Goodbye, Mackenzie." As I walked out of the lawyer's office, I was struck by how different this exit felt from my desperate escape from his parents' house 6 months earlier. Then, I had fled in pain and shock. Now I was walking away by choice, head held high. My cell phone buzzed with a text from Allison. "Done. Done," I replied. "Meeting you at Riverside Cafe in 20. Allison was waiting with champagne when I arrived. "To freedom," she toasted, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," I amended, clinking my glass against hers. Over lunch, I shared the details of the final meeting with Jason. "It's strange," I admitted. "I feel sad, but not for the reasons I expected. I'm sad for the person I was, the woman who thought she deserved so little that she accepted being treated that way." "You've come a long way," Allison observed. "Remember the first night you stayed with me? You kept asking if you were overreacting." I nodded. "I still have moments of doubt, dear. Chan says that's normal after leaving any abusive situation. The conditioning runs deep." "Speaking of Dr. Chan," Allison said, "how's therapy going?" "It's helping," I replied. "We've been working on recognizing red flags I missed with Jason, understanding why I was vulnerable to that dynamic in the first place. Much of it traced back to losing my parents young and craving the family connection the Thompsons had seemed to offer. Jason had appeared to be everything I wanted: charming, stable, from a good family. I hadn't recognized that his charm masked a deep insecurity, that his stability depended on maintaining his father's approval, that his good family was built on dominance and control rather than love and respect. "The hardest part," I confided to Allison, "is forgiving myself for staying as long as I did." "You left when it mattered most," she reminded me. "When the mask finally dropped completely, you walked away. That counts for a lot." After lunch, I headed to my classroom to prepare for the following week's lessons. The school was quiet on Saturday afternoon, just a few teachers catching up on work. I found peace in organizing my lesson plans, selecting readings for my students, creating the kind of thoughtful educational environment Gerald had dismissed as babysitting. My classroom had become another sanctuary, a space where I was valued for my mind, my compassion, my ability to connect with young people at a critical point in their development. The teaching career that the Thompsons had belittled gave me purpose and community when I needed it most. As I was leaving the building, I ran into Brian Hayes, the new history teacher who had started in September. We chatted occasionally in the faculty lounge, and I'd noticed his kindness with struggling students. "Mackenzie." He greeted me with a warm smile. "Working on a Saturday too." "Just getting ahead on lesson plans," I explained. "You." Grading essays on the Civil War, he said, holding up a stack of papers. I promised my students I'd have them back by Monday. Ambitious, I commented with a smile. Maybe foolishly so, he admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. I was about to take a coffee break. Actually, care to join me? The new place across the street makes a decent cappuccino. 6 months ago, I might have politely declined, retreating to the safety of isolation. But the woman I had become recognized an honest invitation when she heard one. I'd like that, I said. Over coffee, Brian and I discovered shared interests in literature, hiking, and obscure documentaries. The conversation flowed easily, without the constant self-monitoring I'd grown accustomed to with Jason and his family. When Brian mentioned he was organizing a faculty book club, I found myself volunteering to host the first meeting at my apartment. Fair warning, I said. It's small, and the decor is definitely still a work in progress. Sounds perfect, he replied. My place is basically a shrine to unfinished projects and history books. As I walked home afterward, I realized I'd spent 2 hours talking without once worrying about saying the wrong thing or being judged for my opinions. The contrast with my former life was stark. That evening, I received an unexpected email from Karen, Ryan's wife. The subject line read simply, "Thank you, Mackenzie," she'd written. I've wanted to reach out for months but wasn't sure if my message would be welcome. What happened at that dinner forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about the Thompson family dynamic and my role in it. Ryan and I have been in counseling since May. It's been difficult but necessary work. I won't ask for forgiveness for my part in how you were treated, but I wanted you to know that your courage that night changed more than just your own life. Wishing you well, Karen. I sat with the email for a long time, unsure how to respond or if I should respond at all. Finally, I wrote back a simple acknowledgement. Karen, thank you for sharing this. I wish you well on your journey too. Mackenzie. As fall deepened toward winter, my life settled into new rhythms. The faculty book club became a monthly highlight, expanding to include potluck dinners and lively debates. My relationship with Brian evolved naturally from collegial to friendly to something with potential for more, though we both moved cautiously, respecting each other's boundaries. I rejoined the community theater group I drifted away from during my marriage, taking a small role in their holiday production. On opening night, I was surprised to see Abigail in the audience, who had become something of a friend since our coffee meeting. I wouldn't have missed it, she said during the reception afterward. Besides, I have news. I'm getting married in the spring, and I'd love for you to be there. I'd be honored, I told her sincerely. Will your parents attend? Her expression grew serious. I invited them, but on my terms. No Gerald taking over. No emotional manipulation. They can come as guests who respect my choices, or they can stay home. That's brave, I said, recognizing the strength it took to set such boundaries. I learned from you, she replied. Watching you walk away that night showed me it was possible to choose yourself over toxic family expectations. As winter settled over the city, bringing the first anniversary of my departure from the Thompson family orbit, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The pain had not disappeared entirely. I suspected it never would, but it had transformed into something valuable. Wisdom, resilience, self-knowledge. My therapist had suggested writing a letter to my younger self, the woman who had entered that fateful dinner a year ago. I sat at my desk one evening watching snow fall outside my window, and began to write, Dear Mackenzie, tonight will be the hardest night of your life. You will be hurt, betrayed, and forced to make an impossible choice. I wish I could spare you that pain, but I can't because that pain will set you free. When you walk out that door tonight, you are not leaving a marriage, you are reclaiming yourself. The road ahead is difficult, but I promise you this. 1 year from now, you will sleep peacefully. You will laugh freely. You will speak your mind without fear. You will recognize your worth without needing anyone else's validation. The woman you become through this fire is stronger than you can imagine. She is waiting for you on the other side of tonight. Trust her. She knows the way home. With love and courage. Your future self. I folded the letter and slipped it into my journal, a private reminder of how far I'd come. Then I picked up my phone and texted Brian. Still on for hiking tomorrow if the snow stops? His reply came moments later. Absolutely. Fair warning. I make terrible trail mix but excellent hot chocolate. I smiled, appreciating his humor. His respect for my independence, the easy way he fit into my reconstructed life without trying to dominate it. Later that evening, I received a final email notification. The last auto payment to the joint credit card Jason and I had shared had been processed and the account officially closed. Another chapter ended. Another tie severed. I closed my laptop and looked around my small, peaceful apartment. At the bookshelves filled with titles of my choosing, the comfortable furniture arranged to please only me, the spaces where friends gathered regularly for book discussions and movie nights. This life I had built from the ashes of what I'd lost wasn't perfect, but it was authentically mine. The woman who had spilled wine on her father-in-law a year ago had been trapped in a life too small for her spirit. The woman who had walked away rather than apologize for being abused had found the courage to demand more. From herself, from her relationships, from her life. I once thought leaving meant failure. Now I understood that sometimes walking away is the greatest success of all. If you've ever had to make the difficult choice between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, I hope my story helps you find the courage to choose yourself. No relationship is worth sacrificing your safety or self-respect. Thank you for listening to my journey. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to start over. I'd love to know in the comments, what red flags have you recognized in relationships that helped you make important changes in your life? Your story matters too.